to conduct more business. If my other two colleagues would introduce themselves before we get started, please.
Karen Hiller, District 1.
Mike Padilla, District 5.
Okay. And I'm Councilwoman Ortiz, I represent District 3, and I am the chair. First thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes for December the 17th. Has everybody had a chance to look at them?
Yep.
Okay. I'll take a motion from the floor.
So moved.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's 3-0, Liz. Next thing on the agenda is presentations from the police department. And I will turn this over to
Right here.
Sergeant. Help me with your last name.
Holtum.
Holtum.
Captain Holtum.
Captain
Holtum.
Captain, oh
Holtum.
my God, let me start
Get it
over.
right.
And I will turn this over. Mike, you didn't hear that,
I
did
will
you,
answer to
Mike?
whatever you call
No.
it.
I got your back on that one. You're still captain.
Oh, I am Captain. He's got the floor. Did you hear that, Mike?
I heard it.
Okay. I had to
I
correct myself.
snapped my heels when I heard it.
I know. No disrespect intended. I
None
apologize.
taken whatsoever.
Just some of them senior moments that kick in, you know. Okay, so we'll start with you.
Okay, we'll get the PowerPoint pulled
Okay.
up here.
Oh, is that what we're doing? Sorry.
Okay, so the first couple items on the agenda were civilian boards and programs and community partnership programs. I think everybody in the room is aware that, you know, the Topeka Police Department has always had quite a focus on community involvement. I think it's important to point out that, you know, thank you very much. You know, by nature of the profession, we're involved in the community, but the next several slides will point out that it goes just beyond, or quite a bit beyond, the involvement that comes along with the profession. When I saw this agenda item, it was interesting to me because I thought I had a pretty good grasp of our personnel and what they were involved in, the boards they were involved in, and I knew quite a few of them off the top of my head. But I thought, you know, let's reach out department-wide because I don't know everything, and let's see what all our people are involved in out in our community. And it was quite telling from the responses that I got back. There were around 55 or so community boards and partnerships that our people are part of throughout the year, where they are regularly out in the community, not only being a great face for the department and the city, but also then it's kind of a reciprocal process where they learn about what's going on in the community, the needs of the community, those deeper needs of the community through these boards. So we can move through these next slides. I can point out some of the boards that we are a part of, and I think it'll be quite surprising to everyone that the number of boards that we're a part of.
Captain, before you do that, can I ask, does anybody have any questions about our first slide? I do know that you sit on the Juvenile Correction Advisory Board, and can you tell me, or do you know what they do there? I know what they do, but I thought that would be good for for people to kind of get a feel for that. Karen, did you have any questions on any of these boards?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know questions per se, but I did get a chance to just kind of cruise through this before the meeting. I think it would be helpful for us, for you to distinguish between the ones that the city or the department actually hosts versus the ones that, just to clarify the difference, not versus, but which ones we have a seat on the board and which ones people are attending, just so we kind of have an idea, because I think they're mixed together here.
They are mixed together, and I may not be able to quite mash those out for you
Okay.
right here, but we can move through some of these the best we can.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Offer the explanations that were offered to me
Okay.
from those who sit on the boards and have the memberships.
Okay.
But to answer the question, the Juvenile Corrections Advisory Board, established by the state of Kansas, and they review and advise on juvenile corrections enforcement practices in the state. And as you guys know, over the past several years, that's been fairly involved with the juvenile justice reforms. I think that started around 2017 in that area. So we have membership on that advisory board. I think that's, a key place to be, going through the reforms that we've been through in the juvenile justice side, to have that local law enforcement perspective that sits on the board, and can advise on some of the policies and practices. So just moving on, and I don't know if you're going to want me to read each one of these because there's a lot of them. But 2022 East Topeka Momentum Committee, Club Blue, I can speak to that one. That's a new, newly formed last year club within the Boys and Girls Club Topeka, which I serve on. We do a lot of volunteer and fundraising opportunities, which has been slowed due to COVID, but it's a group of young professionals that, as our slogan says, we do whatever it takes to support the kids of the Boys and Girls Club. We have the Visit Topeka Board of Directors, the Mayor's Task Force on Domestic Violence, Entrepreneurial and Minority Development, Momentum 2022 Economic Development. I'm not used to having the clicker here myself. The Small Business Council, the Shawnee County Crime Stoppers, Arts Connect, that was the organization, as you recall, that we partnered with for the mural on the back of the building here. The Law and Public Safety Pathway through USD 501. That's a kind of an advisory board for our TCALC classes and curriculum. Topeka Police Explorers Advisory Board, and then we also have the Topeka Police Explorers Post Fund, which is the 501c3, which manages the funding of that. The OK program.
What's the OK program?
The OK program is a program through the schools where it's a mentorship program for young African American males.
Is that,
Tim
Bill?
Bell.
Tim Bell,
Tim
yes.
Bell, Our Kids program.
okay. That's what I just want to make sure, okay.
So this one actually has full-time staff assigned to it.
That's correct.
Correct.
I mean,
Tim Bell.
these vary quite a bit, but just 1.0. Is that right, or are there more than Officer Bell?
Well, obviously he has the support of the entire agency, but assigned to it is primarily Officer Bell. He obviously has the crossover and support when he needs it for different programs. He's the point of contact, but I think that would be one of the few ones that's his assignment, primary assignment.
Topeka Center for Advanced Learning and Careers, Law Enforcement Pathway Advisory Board. That's another board that advises on our TCALC curriculum through 501. Topeka Community Foundation Board of Directors, the Summer Camp, Youth Outreach Program Board of Directors, the 3rd Judicial District Drug Treatment Court, Kansas Cops Law Enforcement Liaison, Harvesters Community Advisory Council, Topeka Youth Project, the National Tactical Officers Association, the Heartland Tactical Officers Association, Vallejo Board of Directors, the Vallejo Community Residence Program Board, and as you all are aware, our behavioral health unit, Sergeant Clam, serves on many boards in the community, to include those on Vallejo. He's actually our member on the Vallejo Board of Directors. Shawnee County Crisis Intervention Teams Council, Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Subcommittee, Kansas Citizens Committee Subcommittee, Shawnee County Homeless Task Force, Capital City Homeless Outreach. Those two predominantly lie within our behavioral health unit as well, and our community police officers, Community Outreach Bureau. Police Athletic League Board of Directors, Family Service and Guidance Center Board of Directors, Shawnee County Suicide Prevention Coalition Board of Directors, Advisory Board for Topeka Center for Advanced Learning and Careers, Community Corrections Advisory Board, the Kansas Internal Affairs Investigators Association, Restorative Justice and Youth Committee, the Manna Day Topeka, Strengthening Police and Community Partnership, Ronald McDonald House of Charities of Northeast Kansas, the Strategic Leadership Community Relations Task Force, Leadership Greater Topeka, Topeka's Top 20 Under 40 Jayhawk Council. Over the years, we've actually had numerous members of the agency that have been nominated and selected for that recognition. This was, I think this was last year's, if you see the picture over there, with Sergeant Cody Berger and Officer Tim Bell both being selected for that recognition. The Strategic Leadership Academy, City of Topeka Above and Beyond Award Committee, TCALC Advisory Board for Law Enforcement Public Safety, Washburn University Leadership Studies Mentor. We have Washburn University Adjunct Professor, the Jewish Temple Beth Shalom Security Council Member, Greater Topeka Public Safety Foundation, the Salvation Army Board, What Works City Planning Committee, the Northeast Kansas Regional Council Board, Boys and Girls Club of Topeka Board, where Chief Willis currently serves as the Vice President, Shawnee County Consolidated Emergency Communication Technology Working Group, Shawnee County Department of Corrections Community Information Board, the Freedom Now Board through the Topeka Rescue Mission, the Red Cross Capital Chapter Board of Directors. Detective Christy Powell's heavily involved in Red Cross, and I think it was last year received recognition for that. Downtown Topeka Incorporated Community Action, the SAVE, or Strategies Against Violence Everywhere, Fiesta Mexicana Committee, Topeka Center for Peace and Justice Executive Board, the Crossover Youth Intervention Team, Shawnee County Human Trafficking Coalition, the Maternal Mortality Review Board through the state of Kansas, Kansas Strong Family First Advisory Council, the Attorney General Law Enforcement Advisory Board and Human Trafficking. And that is the list
Well, I tell you.
that I
think-
received.
Thank you for that. I tell you, I did not realize there was that many boards that the police department was intertwined with, and that's a good thing. Mr. Padilla, if I don't see you, because we've got this up, just feel free to holler if you have any questions. Do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, for as long as I've been associated with the police department, I too, right now even, taken a little by surprise at the number of boards and partnerships that have been presented here. But it comes to my mind, with that many partnerships, my first question is, Captain, when we participate, or the department participates, how are the persons who represent the department selected to serve on those boards? What I'm trying to get to is, are they primarily command staff who attends? Are there rank and file officers who get to participate in some of these boards? Because what I'm curious about is there's plenty of work to do here, it seems, and I can't imagine just a few officers are involved with it. And to my way of thinking, the more officers that share in this outreach to the community, the better, because it seems like a better understanding from top to bottom of what some of these groups do. So just generally, can you give me an idea of maybe, I guess, the demographics of who represents the department by, I guess, rank or position, and by ethnicity and race, so that I see a sharing of these responsibilities?
Well, and I think you said it best when you asked the question, is it represented from top to bottom? And the answer to that is absolutely. As we pointed out, you know, Chief Wheelis in the room serving on the Boys and Girls Club Board of Directors as the Vice President, that's about as top as you get in the organization. And it does go all the way down to the officer level, like we brought up, Officer Tim Bell serving with the OK program. And we have, at every rank across the spectrum is represented on these boards. As far as selection and appointment, you know, the chief does like his commanders to be involved in the community and bring that back to the agency and kind of be that driving force of change or new ideas that come from the community and come from sitting on these boards. But also the selection for many of these committees come from what assignment that officer or that sergeant or detective, lieutenant, captain, major, chief, and I can say they were all represented because they all responded to my request for information. For example, you know, our sergeant who oversees our special victims unit in our Criminal Investigations Bureau, you saw a couple boards on there represented for human trafficking, and she represents the department on those boards. So it can be assignment specific, so how it relates to what they do here in the agency. I gave the example earlier of Sergeant Clam and the Behavioral Health Unit with the Vallejo boards and the Homeless Outreach boards. So that's representative of his assignment within the agency. But yes, it does represent the entire rank structure within the agency as far as the assignment to the boards.
And I can add to that on my own experience. A lot of times the rank structure you follow through, because my own experience with the Boys and Girls Club board here in town has followed me through a number of the promotions. So I can tell you, when you're on those boards for long periods of time too, you grow as they grow, which helps the agency and the community, because as your knowledge and influence grows within the department, also within the community. And there's just every chief I've ever been under has seen the benefits to embedding their people in these community organizations, because it's 1,000-fold of all of the things that you never intended to be when you were involved in these things. It's the information flows back and forth with the other business leaders and community leaders that are on these boards that is the hard thing to measure. Beyond the mission of the individual board, it's the relationships and the networking that grows from there that I've found to be so valuable. But I can tell you with the Boys and Girls Club, I started as a lieutenant, and now I'm the chief, and I'm still on the Boys and Girls Club Board of Directors. And so I would tell you that, and I know Councilman Padilla is aware, but we try to start as young and as low rank as we can at this agency and grow those relationships, because it's about the long haul, and I'm a pretty good example of that in this community.
And I would agree. I think boots on the ground is great, and you're growing not only with those kids, you're growing as they age up, you know.
That's
So
right.
you're getting older and they're getting older, and you can identify and relate to them, and I think that's good, because I truly believe the community needs us and we need the community. It's a twofold. The police need us and we need them, and
Right.
we can't do it without one or the other.
And we live here too, and
Yep.
we're as concerned about, I mean, a lot of the agencies that you see on there, I mean, Salvation Army, Red Cross, Harvesters, we have the same concerns that everyone else has that doesn't wear uniforms in regards to unsheltered population and hunger and disaster aid and all of those things. So there's a lot of the boards, Councilman Hunter, that you were talking about that are related to our positions and our roles, but there's a lot of them that are beyond
Right.
that as well,
yeah.
because we live in the community
Yeah.
and we care about, you know, the grand scheme of things. But I can tell you, it's one of the most rewarding experiences that I have had, and it has nothing to do with the police work, but it's the relationships, and I know that you guys can all attest to that as well. But I can assure you that it's been a tremendous benefit to us individually and agency-wide. Captain Holtham is on the path to transition to the Boys and Girls Club Board when I leave in the next month or two. So it's going to continue on, and I think that's the big piece, is the succession planning and moving it forward beyond any individual.
And the thing that I take away from just speaking with some of our officers that serve on some of these boards, as well as myself, the experience that I've had with Club Blue and the Boys and Girls Club, you think you know what these organizations do and how involved they are in the community. But when you serve on one of these boards, it is eye-opening, and you realize what all they truly do for the community, and you grow a new appreciation for the work that is being done through all these
And it
boards.
lets us make better decisions too for police matters, because we see a broader and are exposed to a broader cross-section of the community and their expectations. It makes us better decision makers and policy makers. So.
That's awesome. Mike, did that answer all your questions?
Well, it does, and thank you, Madam Chair. It prompts a couple others, so I'm really pleased to hear what both the captain and the chief had to say, because it's been my same experience when I was at the police department, that the more you engage yourself in these kinds of community service organizations, you're right, it makes you, I think, a better, more well-rounded officer and person. And so, to my mind, jumps the question, Chief or Captain, in your training academy, has there ever been given some thought, because you are good examples of how this kind of involvement develops professional law enforcement officers for our community and connects them with the community. Has there ever been given any thought to having a course on board service or something like that, so that the recruits are learning all the basic of law enforcement skills, but the community and interaction skills is something that I think it's a seed planted early on. And if you consider thinking about that as a recruit, immediately you might see something that you want to hang your hat on. And as you suggest, Chief, start off your career at one end and end up your career at the other end, doing as much good as you can with those organizations. So it just comes to my mind that as we talk about the training that we receive and the service that we do, more about looking in a different perspective about not eliminating, but adding to the curriculum of the academy to include these kinds of, I guess, professional development courses. I know that from my experience, when people are exposed to the opportunities, they seek out that which interests them, and they can serve on that. And I think you're exactly right. It does make you a better professional in any service, and certainly in law enforcement. But any thought ever been given to something like that, or would it be something you could consider?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, I can say, I mean, there's obviously classes and training in regards to community policing, but specific to board service, I would say probably not. I mean, we're dealing with probationary employees in the academy, so I think that's probably why it's never been considered. But I think it's a great idea, and I was even thinking as you were talking, I think it would be a great idea for some of the senior commanders, myself included, to express our own experiences on this board and the value that we see into it headed out the door and as we move through. So I think it's a great idea. It has not been a piece that's specific to the training academy, but I think it's a good idea, and I think we could personalize it from our own commander development experiences. So I wrote it down. I appreciate the idea.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Karen, do you have anything?
I think this is phenomenal. When we're done talking about it in terms of how much you all grow professionally and personally from this, obviously one of the things that we're tasked with as a committee is to also look at what venues already exist for you all to get feedback from the community. And so these weren't grouped in terms of who. I'm thinking that there are a couple of oversight or related boards that aren't on this list, but if you could talk to us a little bit about how, if there's issues or unrest, I mean, are you all just sitting in all those meetings, or do you know, whether it's about trafficking or kids or juvenile justice or whatever, are they leaning on your representatives there? Could you talk a little bit about how community feedback, if it comes to you, good or bad, ideas, praise, problems, how these interactions work for that?
Yeah, no, I think it's all of the above, and that's really the purpose of being on a lot of these committees, is to get that feedback firsthand by sitting on these boards, having, you know, it's important that we have a voice and have some influence on some of these, but that goes both ways. You know, for example, the two boards that were mentioned on human trafficking, one through Shawnee County, and then one that's with through the Attorney General's office. Those board seats at the table, so to speak, give us the opportunity to, you know, we know what we know that's going on in our community, but then to hear the broader picture from the service providers and the educators that serve on those boards too, then we can take that back and we look at our procedures and our policies and the services that we might be able to extend to the victims of, for example, human trafficking in our community. So yes, by having those board memberships, we're bringing stuff to the table, and you know, we have our input and we give our insight, but we're taking just as much, if not more, back from those and looking at our own policies and procedures internally to make sure that we're providing the best service.
To that, I would also add that, on my own experience, I have seen, when you have police officers in the room, we have a tendency when we get input to be solutions-oriented. And I can tell you that I know of several different speaking engagements and panel discussions that came out of these board memberships where people got to know us in the business community, people got to know us in the civic service community, and then when they had events, they plugged the police officers and the police commanders in to those discussion groups as well. I can tell you specifically with the Boys and Girls Club 3 years ago, we brought in chiefs of police from all over the state of Kansas to the youth conference, and the kids that were doing the speeches and competing for the national scholarships sat on a panel where they discussed law enforcement issues and youth and police relations with chiefs of police from all over the state, and that was the first time that had ever been done. And that came out of a board meeting conversation between concerned business and civic leaders about what can we do to bridge the communication gap. So I can tell you specifically from my own experience that being in those rooms is an important piece, because then the discussions branch off and you get a lot of avenues of conversation that weren't open to you before.
Well, I totally agree. And our youth, they need that.
You're right, 100%.
I have to tell you a funny story really quick. My daughter said, I just got off the phone with Kevin Cook, and my grandson, who just turned 14 yesterday, said, Kevin Cook? You know Kevin Cook? You just got off the phone with him? And so I said, would you like to talk to him? He goes, yeah. So Kevin said, all you had to do was have your granny call me. And he goes, oh, that's just my granny, and that's just it. Kids look at it like I'm just nobody, I'm just granny, but this is somebody they see or they've heard or they've talked to.
Right.
And we've got to get into that. Not only that, I see a lot of elderly. I really liked, I think it was one chief, let me think of his name real quick, and he, you might help me, Karen, he got out and had everybody walk the beat. Was that Brown? Was that Brown? No, it was before Brown. And he would take a group of officers, sergeants, lieutenants, and they'd go walk East Topeka, they'd go walk, they picked a different area, Oakland, and they just got out and walked the beat, walked up and down the street and talked to people. We've got to get back to that. And I think these boards help do that, but they just got to talk to people when something was happening. They remembered who they were talking to, and they could call that person
Sure.
because they felt comfortable with that.
The personal connection.
Exactly.
But those kids were blown away by being able to sit in a room full of chiefs of police from all over the state and ask questions. And it was even more interesting, the conversations that took place not in the formal conversation. So I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
If I could follow up then?
Sure.
And I'm thinking of who you listed and interactions that I hear about all the time, with trafficking, homeless, kids. I've sat in on the DTI meetings, and so the discussions about downtown. We have had unrest this year, though. There have been claims that if somebody was not, that certain pieces weren't working. Is there anything missing from this list that you think of right now, or are
Well,
we
you saw
perhaps
that
not taking advantage of those?
SPCP was obviously on there.
It was.
That was directly related to the topic that you're talking about. But
Uh-huh.
I think it's a lot harder to track the informal conversations that are opened up because people know how to reach out to you in numbers and stuff. But those are ones I would point to directly related to that.
Well, and I think there are a couple other boards that are not your boards, if you will, like the Human Relations Commission and like the Civil Service Board, that tie in with issues that are related to policing as well. Maybe it's not for right now, but I guess, one of our charges is there a gap or not? Are we covered? This is incredible, and I think a lot of I'm always somebody for making the list, because there's so much that people don't realize often in any organization of ways that an organization is connected or that people are working together. And this community is good about that, and I think probably anybody would go, wow. This is a great And there's probably still some pieces missing, like your own CIT unit, which reaches out and brings in all those other people. You used to have the hoarding task force, which was interdepartmental as well. So, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would tell you, I'm very proud of the number, but I can assure you, it's not comprehensive because we put it together the best we could with emails and things like that. But, you know, there are certainly, I mean, I can tell you there's a number of youth sports and there's Boy Scouts and there's,
Well,
we didn't put all
the
of those on there.
boxing program's not on there, right?
Yeah, so without a doubt, there are some, it's not a comprehensive list, but we felt like it was a pretty good
Oh,
representation.
it's real good.
But
you
I
just-
think the important piece is that we are trying to get across from this is that we live here. We are people. We care about the same things that everybody else cares about. And we show that with some of these volunteer organizations. But I would agree with you, it's not a comprehensive list because none of the youth sports stuff is on there, none of the Boy Scout stuff is on there. Well, Jayhawk Council was on there, I suppose.
Well, you know, perfect example.
Yeah,
I mean,
the police athletic league isn't on there,
That's right.
right?
The police athletic, yeah, we had that on the list, but you also got to consider that these are predominantly organizations that came forward and made the list because it is
They're outside.
involved with the police department. But what's not on the list is the number of officers that we have that coach a youth sports team. And everybody on that team knows what that person does for a living. And now they're in a mentor position in a whole different part of their life, but we still know what they do for a profession, and they're positively representing that profession. If we had those on the list, I'd still be reading.
Right.
And church organizations and those kind of things,
Yeah.
it would be a lot longer list,
my
for
gosh,
sure.
yeah.
But this was more, I think the focus of where the captain and I were looking at this is more of the official on the police department representative type boards that we have on.
And that's good. And thank you for, I mean, I wanted to look at it because it is bigger than that with
It is.
what you've talked about with people's personal involvements as well as some of those other boards that are generated from the department and programs from the department that also, that's great. Again, our charge is to understand this better and to make sure the community knows it and then ultimately to see if it's enough and we just weren't using it, all the pieces as well as we could or whether there's
Yeah, and I think it's
anything
important
missing.
too that we get the word out too, because we're always looking for new opportunities.
Yep.
So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, feel free to reach out to us and have the conversation, because I would charge that almost every board in town could benefit from having a member of the police department on there just for a different perspective. So we're open to additional ones as well.
What I'm hearing though, and this will be my last point, would be that I think sometimes people worry about, I mean, it's tax dollars that pay for the time of anybody who's on the street in uniform or sitting in a meeting, that it's well deployed. And I'm sure that there are places where you've had officers that aren't on this list because you're not involved with them anymore. It's sounding to me like the time that is spent is of value, that we're getting a return on that investment of time when you have chosen as a department to have somebody there on our time.
Well, and I think
So
it's
I'm
important.
just wanting to,
Yeah, and I think it's important to
that out.
have that discussion too, because I can assure you from my own board experience, while I was always an officially sanctioned representative on the Boys and Girls Club Board of Directors, all of the activities that I ever did were not necessarily on the clock and compensated for, as you would expect with any volunteer organization. So, and Captain Haltom has put in a great deal of time with Club Blue. One of the things they did was help decorate the zoo out at the light show. And, you know, I can assure you that he takes a lot of pride in those kind of things too. So,
I could tell. He started smiling when he mentioned that one.
yeah.
I helped build the giraffe. I'd just like to.
Hey, very rarely do our kids think we're cool, but he said that his kids thought he was cool for being involved in the life at the zoo, so.
well, and I was going through my pictures the other day, and when we did Ciclavia a couple of years ago, and the bike officers were out there, and we did some rides that the officers helped with, but also there was this, what was it called, a slow race? Do you
Yeah.
remember? You were in that, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
And the officers were, the deal was you had to go as slow as possible and be last, and y'all were pretty good at balancing without falling off.
Okay, let's
fun.
move forward. If you see any more boards that are brought to your attention that you feel like we need to have, don't hesitate to bring it to one of our meetings or let us
absolutely.
know. Because I agree, I think we need to get the word out there that these to compile our list. And that was interesting. B is community partnership programs.
Well, and I kind of lumped all of those
Yeah.
together in that list, so if you're ready to move to C, we can do that, or if there's further
Okay.
discussion on,
Well, let me check with Mike. Mike, do you have anything on B? You have anything you want to add, or?
Well, I had a follow-up, but I don't want to slow down the conversation
No, go
here.
ahead. Let's get it over with. Let's do this.
Okay. If I could just ask, would it be possible, Captain or Chief, in the capacity of the advisory boards to the chief's office, could you give me just kind of an example without specifics, names, dates, and all that other stuff, of an issue or problem, if it's brought into that committee and group, how that issue is worked and kind of what the process is? Let's say Chairman Ortiz comes in with an observation about something that needs to be addressed by the police department, and she has a representative on that advisory council, and the issue is brought up. How is it worked? Do they try to work through it just from, I guess, the police perspective, or is there often opportunities for the community to give their perspective of it and then come to some suggestions or resolutions? Just a quick idea, because I know committees all work in different ways, and typically the best ones that work well are the ones that trust each other in how the process works. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand. I think everybody has a voice in those committees, and I just give you a chance to tell us how that voice is expressed and used in those discussions.
Well, I know from Chief Cochran, my experience under Chief Cochran with his advisory board, that oftentimes in the very early formation of any project or idea that he had, that he was contemplating, that often started with the idea being brought forth to the Chief's advisory board, and he gave them the sounding board and the initial perspectives and input, so that he had a cross-section of that decision that he would make. In general terms, I can talk to you about my experience with him, and specific to the Chief's advisory board, just from our conversations, that was a lot of times the formation that he did for a lot of the progressive ideas that he brought forward during his administration. That was the starting, to make sure, and sometimes those ideas were well received and sometimes they weren't, and that way he would kind of know as a sounding board, which was his vision of what the Chief's Advisory Council was, his input from the community before he rolled it out in a more formal setting. So from that standpoint, they had very, very formative decision-making pieces, or input pieces at least, to his thought process. To my knowledge, there's only been a few times where they brought him issues that were not things that he had already put on the agenda for discussion. But like I said, hopefully that answers your question, but I know that was one of the very beginning steps that he had whenever he was looking at some big ideas or community partnerships or programs. He often started with that group for their input on the idea.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And who, if I may ask, how is that advisory board chosen? Is it chosen by the chief
Yes.
himself? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Karen?
Well, if we could follow up, because I thought at one point maybe there was more than one chief's advisory board or committee. Could you give us an idea of who's maybe serving on it now, or what kind of composition it usually has?
Yeah, the only one that I know of is the Chief's advisor, as
Okay.
far as pertaining to the Chief's advisory board, is the Chiefs Advisory Board.
Okay.
But as far as the makeup, I mean, it was a cross-section that he put together of community leaders across ethnic, religious, diversity background pieces. He always spoke to me in big terms about always trying to have it be as much of a cross-section of the community for him to bounce ideas off of and to bring him concerns and questions. I will have to delay and give you a list of his advisory board members. I don't know that off the top of my head. So that's what I would tell you. That's what his vision was when he always talked to me about it, was the makeup of it being as diverse as he possibly could make it. And obviously, he had the benefit of being in the community for 30 years and knew a lot of people in a lot of places, as you all know. But I could get you a list of his counsel.
But he used it pretty much to vet ideas rather than to
Right.
bring issues forward and,
Right. Well, there was always a section of that meeting that was open to what concerns they had. And beyond just the formal meeting, that Chiefs Advisory Group had access to the chief. I mean, they could reach out when they had some concerns beyond the meetings, but they did bring things forward too, on their own concerns, and got answers as well. But he valued their input across the board from a lot of decisions. But they had the ability to bring forth their own concerns and form that part of the meeting as well.
okay, thank you.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, the next item on the agenda was the Topeka Police Department's specialty units and discussion on the application process, the selection and training of those units. So I will try to make the best sense out of this for you, because there's a couple different avenues we'll go, and I didn't want to create a dozen slides for each one, so I'll keep it fairly general, but try to explain it the best I can. But starting off with just a list of units within the agency that have a selection process. So we're talking outside of patrol officers in the Field Operations Bureau. We're talking outside of promotional positions to like detective or sergeant. We're talking units within the agency. So two different headers you'll see up there with full-time and then what I would consider a collateral duty unit, and I'll explain those in a minute. So full-time units would include the K-9 unit, the school resource officers, our behavioral health unit, the motorcycle unit, community police officers, our task force officers, our narcotics unit, court services, and our technology unit. So those positions, those officers or supervisors within those units, that is what they do full-time. That is their assignment. The collateral duty, as you'll see that list, the response team, the bomb squad, the ATV unit, accident reconstruction unit, crisis negotiators, honor guard, security preservation team. The officers and supervisors that make up those units have other full-time responsibilities within the agency. So, for example, somebody serving on the accident reconstruction team may be a second shift patrol officer in a full-time capacity. So full-time and part-time specialty units. But as you'll see, selection processes and training for both will kind of bleed together here. So let's back that up just a little. There we go. Okay, so the application process for a specialty unit, and most of this, is dictated by policy and contract, is a 7-day posting of that job opening. So, for example, the K-9 unit, an opening becomes available that position has to be posted throughout the agency for a minimum of 7 days. So those interested in that position have the opportunity to express their interest through a memo that's submitted through the chain of command. They can also include in that memo attachments like a resume or letters of recommendation. So that 7-day period gives them the opportunity to craft that well-written memo and get their resume together and seek letters of recommendation that they want to attach to that. The applicant eligibility includes a minimum term of continuous service. So there are special units within the agency that you can't just come out of the academy day one and apply for some specialty unit. There are minimum terms of continuous service that apply to specialty units. For example, the response team is a minimum of 24 months of continuous service before you're even eligible to apply. And with most, if not all of them, it's successful completion of the 18-month probation period. So these are important ones to point out specifically. By contract, the specialty units that you'll see in this list, and I'll read through them, at all ranks are designated for selection by the chief of police at his or her sole discretion. So that 7-day posting would still apply for the position that's open, so those folks interested can submit that memo, the resume, letters of recommendation, but the following units are designated for chief's choice or chief selection. So the assistant director of training, and some of these aren't necessarily a unit as much as a position, but I took these straight out of contract just so we'd have that entire list. The assistant director of training, the armor or range master, professional standards unit, field training supervisors, narcotics unit officers, training academy officer, ATV assignments, field training officers, and the field training detectives. So the list of applicants from these positions or these units will go to the chief of police for selection. So short of that list now, we're going to talk about the remaining specialty units and the management council process. I'll hand each of you get this in a minute.
Thank you.
So, all officers who may be interested in a specialty position, other than the ones designated for selection by the chief, must apply for management council consideration within the required 7-day posting period. A management council, it's like an interview board, if you will, consists of 3 police administrators, the supervisor of that specialty unit. So for example, opening in the K-9 unit, there would be 3 police commanders on that management council, and the supervisor of the unit, so the sergeant of the K-9 unit would also have a seat on that council. The management council is also attended by a labor council member who is not a I use the term, I guess, voting member of the council, but is there to observe, make sure the rules of the road are followed by contract and policy. And they also consistently check our math on those score sheets to make sure we didn't get that wrong. So there's checks and balances on the board. The management council will rate all applicants on a list based on qualifications, training, experience, education, performance, seniority, and ability. So what this looks like is, and this is where I'll get into the sheet that I handed you. The 7-day posting period goes through all of those qualified candidates that submit that memo of interest within the 7 days, then are collected by whoever's going to chair that council. Personnel files will be requested through HR, the official file, so to speak, on the 6 criteria there. And that will all be brought to the table at the management council so it can be reviewed. So we'll look at things in their qualification, like what training do they have that is related or tied to whatever that specialty position may be. What experience do they have? And I keep going back to the K-9 unit as an example, but we may have an officer who has had previous experience with dog training, maybe through the military or something like that, or has volunteered his or her time on training days with the K-9 unit, so has gained some experience through that avenue as well. We look at their education, and you'll see on the score sheet that that's kind of a defined category. So many points for each hour of college credit, or so many points for a bachelor's degree, master's degree, so on. Job performance. So we look at things like past the past 2 years evaluations, as well as disciplines. What those disciplines were for and how recent they were. And there's also obviously defined points for seniority, and then there's the category of ability. So in that management council, we'll read their memos of interest to the entire panel. We'll read through the resumes if they've provided one. We'll read through the letters of recommendation that we provided. The discussion amongst the panel is very closely monitored, so to speak. I've ran numerous management councils. I've known for running a very tight management council. You don't get to discuss anything outside of personal knowledge of that applicant. In other words, I supervised this person, so I can speak to the quality of their paperwork, their reports, and so on. Not, well, I heard this officer was that, or I've heard this officer. You don't get to have that discussion in the management council, and nor would the labor council member allow us to do so. So we review those files. We look at all of their training certificates that are in their file during that time frame. The score sheet is then tabulated, and then all the applicants are placed in order, high to low, based on that score. And then that information is provided to the chief of police for his final selection. So, as it says, the list is compiled by the management council, shall be provided to the chief, and the chief shall fill job vacancies from the top 4 candidates on the list. And that's directly out of the language in the contract. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of what the specialty units are within the agency, what that application process kind of looks like, and then the 2 avenues, either chief's choice or management council. Ultimately, they all land on the chief's desk for selection and approval. Any questions about that before we move on to a little bit of the training piece in there?
I have a question. Now you said they don't get to speak on something if they know something.
What they,
I
yeah.
mean, so how would you if they don't get to speak on something that they know that's detrimental
Let me clarify that, they don't get to speak to rumors.
to rumors?
They don't
Okay.
get to speak to, I've heard this, well, what did you hear? Well, where'd you hear that? Well, I just heard, through the grapevine there, but,
Okay,
those are the types of things that are not discussed in a management council. It's what is in the personnel file, what's in the training file, what can I speak to from personal knowledge from either working side by side with this person or by supervising this person, what can I speak to through personal knowledge?
okay.
Okay.
That makes me feel a lot better.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I should have probably been a little clearer on that, but
Yeah.
you can't just throw out the rumor mill in the,
Work performance, corrective actions that have past corrective actions can be discussed within the framework.
Karen, did you have a question?
Well, it's along those lines, and again, we're just kind of poking to make sure we're asking the questions that we should. My question will come not from any complaint about people that I've worked with on your special units, and so, but there are concerns about the reviews and about whether people's performance has been documented. And so, I guess my question would be, how true have you found if you're having to make if the management councils are having to make their decisions based on what is in a personnel file, and you can go back and fudge over it if you want to, but have those performance reports and official documents proven to be adequate to make what in hindsight has been an accurate assessment of somebody's readiness for that particular position?
Yeah, I would say so. I would just weigh in and say, I'm very comfortable with the comprehensive nature of the management council. I think Captain Halton was speaking to the regimented structure in regards to that. Not that there can't be some input of it. It's not shaded to just all the positives. There are things in there that have to be dealt with. It's an accurate description of the documentation, and it's in front of you. And like I said, I'm very, very comfortable with the extensive nature of it, because he can tell you he's run several of them. It's a pretty extensive process for looking at, so that's what I would tell you.
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes stuff that has just a numerical score that you have to go with can be a little too rigid, but always well-intended.
So it just, to go back to like our performance evaluations, our performance evaluations are not based on a numerical score. So each category within that performance evaluation requires comment from the supervisor or evaluator. So as we move through that management council process, we pull out that performance evaluation and we say, well, wow, this person exceeded expectations. Why? How?
Okay.
And that's all in there. It's not just a 5 out of 5.
Okay,
There's notes and documentation throughout that performance evaluation that have to paint that picture of a meets or an exceeds evaluation. And those things are discussed in the management council, so.
And I think it's also to look at it fully 360 too. Just because you're selected and you go into a specialty unit, you can still, there's contractual provisions for removal from that unit too, based on
Okay.
performance issues and continuing evaluations. And so I think that's also the thing. It's not a lifetime appointment. There are just cause removal clauses in the contract as well.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, do you have any questions or concerns? You're muted, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, all right. We can move forward.
All right, so as far as the training goes, I picked, just for time's sake, I picked a few of the special units to kind of talk in specifics about the training, but in general, you'll see that the training in those specialty units is quite extensive. So providing the example, the K-9 unit, once that person is selected to the unit, they have to go through a 10-week Kansas Highway Patrol Service Dog program. And in speaking with those who have gone through that program, they described as one of the most intense, challenging book work, written examination programs that they've ever been through. And we're talking college-educated officers who are describing the tests and book work that go along with this to some of their more difficult college curriculum. They train a minimum of 17 hours a month of formal training, so training days. But in this unit, as you can imagine, the on-shift training between the handler and the police service dog is ongoing. That occurs every day because those are perishable skills. The certification of the skills with the dog occurs annually. This is through the Utah Post program, which is a nationally recognized police service dog certification program. And then just currently a little factual information we have 7 patrol dogs and 2 explosive detection dogs. So as you can see, that unit, the training is quite intense.
So when they're training, do they get a dog? Like, okay, so I'm getting ready to go into training, then they get a dog right when they go in to train with?
So typically the newly selected member of that unit will get that dog, because these courses only happen so many times a year.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get in to, so the handler and the dog will actually have time to bond, if you will, prior to the training even beginning. So, but yes, they go through the training with the dog that they are assigned.
So we have 7 patrol dogs,
7 patrol dogs and 2 explosive detection dogs.
so we have 9 dogs altogether. Wow, I didn't know we had that many dogs.
Just another unit that I pulled out of the hopper to talk about the training, the crisis negotiation team. Not to confuse this with our behavioral health unit or our CIT officers, although there's several members of that unit on this unit. So this is the team that is activated. This is one of the collateral duty teams. Like in the case of a barricaded subject or a hostage situation, where they are actually coming out and doing that crisis communication with those individuals involved, trying to reach that safe voluntary resolution. And as I said, this is one of the collateral duty units. So all the officers in this unit have full-time responsibilities outside of this unit at the agency. Each one of them has a 40-hour certification course in the Public Agency Training Council Crisis Negotiations Phase 1 and 2. There's also a Phase 3 course, which is an additional 40-hour certification course, and it has a 24-hour annual recertification. And this team also then will train quarterly with the unit, with other CNT teams in the region, with our response team, either in scenario-based training, tabletop exercises, a combination of both, but they train 8 hours quarterly at a minimum. And then the behavioral health unit, the basic crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour course, advanced crisis intervention training, which is a 24-hour course. They do an annual CIT refresher course, and then they have attended the applied suicide intervention skills training, which is a 16-hour course as well.
So if I'm out in the field and I run across somebody's trying to commit suicide, then I get on and have somebody from the suicide unit come? Is that what happened? No?
No, so.
How is that handled?
So we have, as you know, the behavioral health unit, and if a situation like that were to occur during their shift, they're on duty, of course, they would be called for their special training and skills. But one of the advantages that we have here at this agency is that 40-hour basic crisis intervention training has been provided to all of our officers.
All of
And-
them, okay, so
and,
just not
yeah, that-
the unit.
Correct. That's
to
in the
everybody.
academy, so all of our officers have training in that area. So we're kind of double covered, if you will. in
Well,
that.
and yeah, and a lot of times, you know, the real world events have shown us that the first responders there are gonna be patrol or whatever, and till we get the scene stabilized and then deal with the assets that we need to allocate to it based on specific factors. But that's why it was so important to have the majority of the officers trained in this, at least to get us to the scene stabilization stage, and we can deal with the assessment from there.
That's great, okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Deputy Mayor,
may
go
I ask
ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
With regards to the CIT group, Captain, it shows there they have a basic training for all officers, and then you have advanced. So basically, you're saying that there are enough officers trained from the basic piece to have CIT training for all shifts?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. All of our officers are given the 40-hour CIT course in the academy, and that has been going on for years and years. And we've also offered that training outside of the academy for the officers who obviously attended the academy prior to this even existing. So then we brought them up to speed in that 40-hour training as well. So yes, the vast majority, if not almost close to 100% of our officers are CIT trained in that basic 40-hour course, and they are represented on all three shifts.
Okay. I don't know, maybe I was, I misunderstood. At one point, I thought that the agency was short an officer to cover the third shift. Now, maybe that's an advanced trained officer
That was the-
that
So,
would
yeah,
cover the third shift?
We're talking about actually the behavioral health unit, when we talk about vacancies or openings in that area. And then I think you may even be referring to a civilian co-responder, so a mental health professional that goes along with our behavioral health unit. So, but as far as, like I said, as far as that basic 40-hour CIT, which is quite extensive, that is representative on all three shifts. So,
Okay, so the behavioral health representative, and that's through Vallejo, correct?
yes.
Okay, and how many do you have for the agency right now?
Where are we at right now? We have three? Two.
I think it's two. Two, and the councilman, that's exactly right. It's the third shift spot that's open currently for the co-responder. That's the distinction to make from the officers. And as
Okay.
you're well aware from your experience, we have that training for all of the majority of the officers, because a lot of times behavioral health unit gets busy on one call, the officers still have other calls that come in. So it's very much the distinction about the advanced training within the unit and with the benefit of the civilian co-responders, as opposed to the general response of training of all of our officers. But I think it bears discussion, and I know you, and I appreciate you guys both trying to bring it out, because that's not the norm for police departments across the state of Kansas, to have the majority of their officers trained at least in a basic level of this. But I believe it will be an expectation moving forward. Luckily, we were ahead of the curve on that for a while now.
Oh, thank you, Chief. And if I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to follow up.
Yep. Please do.
Okay, the Chief, maybe it's just me, but oftentimes when we see interaction between the police and the community that don't go well, it's reported that some of these persons are experiencing a mental health situation or issues that complicate the interaction or the response by the officers. So, and we talk about looking at funding and where do we put money into the police department for needs that are either increasing or need to be increased, like maybe a behavioral health partner for the third shift. Is that something your department would recommend for your agency?
Yes, it would, and I can tell you that and the senior staff will echo this. I've said this numerous times. I believe that law enforcement's response to people in mental health crisis is the single biggest challenge that we have moving forward, because it's the blend of the community expectation that is still being discussed and established, and to what the options are that we have. So this co-responder program we have is an incredibly valuable tool for us in our toolbox of responses, and the training that we do at the basic level to our officers, and we call it basic just so we can make it a distinction, but I can assure you, as Captain Haltom said, it's fairly extensive training, well beyond what is required. And so I think that we need more training. I think we absolutely could use more co-responders. A partnership that increases with Vallejo would just be a more valuable asset to the agency and the community by a long shot. I mean, the degree of training and experience that the advanced officers and co-responders have in the unit is a very different degree, like any other unit and any other level of expertise. But I would absolutely say that this community and any community would be of value to have additional co-responders and additional training for police officers, because the more options we have in our toolbox to respond to our citizens in mental health crisis, the better off we are.
Thank you, Chief. This may or may not be the venue, but as we go through this work of the committee, I think it was important for us to look at things that are needed in the agency that we have not yet addressed, either as a governing body or through the administration of the department. And I think from your comments there that you recognize the need for this, and it would be something that I would support and advocate for, because I really do think that mental health issues can be an extremely volatile situation, and we want to be able to handle it in the safest way for everyone involved. So I appreciate your comments in support of that, as I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and I agree. I've received some calls for some people that were for some mental health issues, and you know, I've heard Vallejo's full, and I'm like, well, what do we do with these people? I mean, you know, because we don't have anywhere to send them, you know, and that's concerning. It's very, very concerning. And the sad part of it is, I know I've dealt with Officer Clan a couple of times, and they already know these people. They just got out of the hospital, or they just, you know, so it's kind of like just a merry-go-round, just like a cycle, you know, and if they don't get their medicine, so, but yeah, I too would support that, because it just seems like it's being more and more of a problem. And I don't know if it's just because of the pandemic or it's just always been there, but the pandemic is not helping as well, but.
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched on one of the very hidden values to this too. The relationships that are developed between mental health consumers that we have dealt with on occasion before with this team, and the rapport that they're able to build, and the situation that they understand all of the dynamics of the person as they're traveling over there. They don't have to do that on the fly like the rest of us do. It's hard to even measure the impact difference on the outcome. And as the councilman said, and all of us are aware, there's been some very traumatic outcomes across the country in dealing with these things. So just because we're ahead of the game doesn't mean that we can relax. We need to stay ahead of the game. And I appreciate the council members' support of this, because we are very much interested in increasing and trying to get the most tools we can for this area, because we value it as well.
Is there anything like a band or anything that, that is out there, like, that recognizes that some of these people, or,
A band.
you know, like a band that they could wear, or, anything that recognizes them? So when they come upon these people, other than, I mean, Officer Clan, he knows everybody, he does, and if he doesn't, he kind of knows who to talk to do this, but I was just wondering, is there any type of programs, like, you know, like you see some people that have diabetes and they might have a band, so like if the ambulance come and they fall out, you know, anything that can identify them? Do we have any type of programs like that?
I'm going to give you the straight answer that I don't know on that, but I agree with you that Officer Clam is a valuable resource, and it's very important, and you hit on this before on a totally different topic, but it's very important that we know our community.
Right.
That as police officers,
Right.
we know all of our community for lots of reasons, and the special populations and everything else. So that's invaluable, because your approach is different.
Right.
And your options are different, and so I would support any kind of thing that gives us more information, just because I always want as much information as we can have to
Well,
assess it.
and not only that, I look at from the kids' point, from our youth point of view, there's a lot of kids with ADHD or whatever trauma that they're suffering for.
Right.
You know, if we could get like something to identify them, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Because when you look at them, they may be okay, but just that one thing can trigger it, and it could just go south from there. It's the same thing with them being an adult, you know? And so I've always wondered about that, you know. I know people that have seizures, again, they have a band or a necklace or something that identifies them, and that, I just didn't know if there was a program, and maybe I'll have Liz research it and kind of see what we could figure out. But that would be really, really cool, to make something really cool for them that they felt happy to wear, but at the same time,
Yeah.
we knew why they were wearing that. You know, because I think, a split second it could go wrong, and we need all the time and the help that we can get.
Yeah.
Karen, do you have anything? No? Okay, continue on.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
may I follow up on one thing else?
yes, you can.
Thank you. Chief, can you tell me if the consolidated dispatch, I would imagine, let's say that there's repeat calls to a particular address, or a person who has been contacted by the police before, that is experiencing a mental health behavioral issue. I would imagine that's noted in the call record, so that the next time an officer goes out there, either uniformed or even a detective doing a follow-up, that information is readily shared rather than have to be asked for, readily shared with those responding officers or detectives. Because sometimes that's what seems to be, is even if we know that Mike Padilla is going to cause a big mess when you get there, that information may not get to the officers before they get to the house and respond to Mike Padilla's issues. And then that's where some things can go off track. Do you know if there's a protocol in dispatch to make sure that information gets to the officers before they get to that location, if time is allowing for that?
Yes,
Well,
there is.
And can I interject real
Go
quick?
ahead.
I know Chief Cochran talked about a program that they had that they could fill out, and I thought that would come under, I don't know if it's in any of this. That's when I started wanting to know what type of programs that we had, but he talked about one that they could fill it out, that when they got that call to that address, it would say such and such and such and such. And I forget the name that he used.
Well, it'd be a HIPAA release for one thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's
No,
some
no,
things.
that they fill out.
Yeah, that they fill
out.
That the caller,
The residents fill out.
correct, but I mean, you'd run into HIPAA problems just volunteering somebody's mental health problems unilaterally.
I think I can answer it.
Okay, go ahead.
I think, and we're touching on a couple of different things, so I'll kind of circle a bit here, but there are, Councilman, to your first question, there are mechanisms in place at the dispatch center that I'm aware of where safety information associated with an address based on past history of calls for police service is available. There are protocols on officer safety flags where that information is readily available and dispatched to them when they get the call for service. And the way it kind of goes around some of the areas and things that we've talked about is it's based on past calls for police service, which is accessible information. And so that's kind of where that is. I think more to your point, I think Chief was talking about the Take Me Home program and some other
Yeah.
voluntary registration programs
Yeah.
for different portions of the special population, which are completely voluntary and therefore they can register or not register. And that's how we get around that. Now, that information, I would have to check with the dispatch center to say, I don't know that that one is, that information, Councilman, is automatically provided. But past calls for history that include, potential officer safety issues or good information for them to have, past acts of violence and those kind of things are given to the officers when they're dispatched. Additional information, and I know the councilman's aware of this, but additional information, an officer has the ability, once they're there, if there is something that pertains to a past call for service, they can specifically ask the dispatcher and say, for example, something like less benign, maybe the 3 nights before they broke a window and they filed that report for criminal damage, the officer might want to link those 2 reports together. Then he can ask for that information as additional. But if it's past history that's relevant because there's potential for violence to the police officers or they had a situation that escalated, any of that information that could flame into an officer safety issue is then provided to them. But the voluntary registration programs are, I think, what you're talking about. That information would have to be more like asked for on a case-by-case basis type situation. But we do have situations with youth members of the special populations that run away frequently, and those are what some of those registrations were to, and the Take Me Home program is specifically like for elderly. So those are all kinds of the different answers, but there is some information at the dispatch center that is given to the officers as soon as they dispatch to the call, if it's certain categories, but they always have the ability to get past history information through requests from dispatch as well. So hopefully I hit everything on that.
I'd like to know more about the Take Me Home information, and I'll put that on one of our agendas, but just know I'll be asking for that. I think that's something that can be very useful, whether it's for the elder, whether it's for the youth, whether it's for the mentally ill. I feel like it won't be breaking a HIPAA law because it's something they fill out and they give to us, because they want their loved ones safe and they want us to know that.
And I think
before
that's an important distinction too, because
Right.
these are for voluntary programs for autism, dementia.
Right.
The mental health consumers is a different category that is a lot more specific. It's a broad category that has a lot more specific diagnoses that we would stay away from for obvious medical privacy issues. But it's the dementia and autism and voluntary registration program is a difference.
Yep. But autism comes in a whole bunch of different forms. I mean, just to keep everybody safe, and I think people would want that, but I'd like to know more about that, please. Okay, continue on. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, thank you
Yes.
very much Madam Chair, thank you for your comments. I agree with you 100% because I just want to make sure that there's no disconnect between the information that we already have and be able to make sure it's shared by the officers before they get there, because just nationally, we've seen those incidents where after the fact, we find out information that the officers should have received and could have helped prevent a situation. So I agree with you, Madam Chair. I'd like the idea of looking at that voluntary registration and getting some coordination between that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just don't feel like, I get it, but I don't feel like we blow our own, wag our own tail. We don't pat ourselves on the back enough, and this is just something that's very, very important, especially critical right now. It's very critical in times like these, that again, the community has got to help you guys, and we need each other. So how can we do that? We've got to come together.
Well, and I would only add, since we're on this topic, that, our officers respond to these type of situations every day,
Yep.
all day, and do a tremendous job with the response that they do, because they have the training and they have the support. But we can always use more of those things, but the people make the difference too.
Thank you. Yes, Gary?
I'm thinking of some other situations that I've had at this point. Is it part of the training for the dispatch officers that they should always check the history on a particular property and brief any officers that are dispatched?
They aren't required to, if they're dispatched to a call for service at, 123 ABC Street, for a disturbance, very little information provided. They are not required to ask call history or officer safety information, but as the chief indicated, the dispatch center has some of the officer safety type house watch information that is available, and the dispatchers typically provide that without being asked. You do hear the officers on the radio frequently asking, is there call history at that address? Or that sounds familiar, is there call history at that address? So that information, that question can always be asked. There may be information available, there may not. And then on the backside of that, when the officer concludes that call, that information can be updated, that information can be added if it didn't exist. That information may need to be deleted because the person that lived there has since moved on, and we don't need to have officer safety information associated with an address if those people are no longer there. So we try to keep that as updated as possible in that vein as well. So.
Well, I've had some in there, well, I don't know how you describe the residents or the people that were involved, but where there were houses that were supposed to be vacant, that had people at them, people showed up at them, calls were made to report and get officer assistance on the scene, but it turned out that we did miss connections on the background on that particular property, and we missed some opportunities to prevent and resolve some things, and there it would have been where kind of a combination I'm thinking of two right now where they were placarded by code. Of course, people had torn it down, but there was history on both properties that the patrol officers who were dispatched didn't get.
Well, when you're talking about, if you're talking about code violation history too, that's kind of a separate thing. And we definitely have been working with code to try to get more of that information back and forth, but.
Well, because in both of these, the TPD had already been involved in knowing that people were getting into the properties and shouldn't be there.
Yeah. And I think those are important things for us to have discussions too. I mean, the system is designed to work this way. A dispatcher's a human that can make a mistake and not provide information. The officer can be doing something else and when they're driving the car and not hear the information correctly too. Because officers were out there before doesn't mean that those are the same officers or it's always the same officers in the area too. So there's always errors that we can work through. No system is perfect.
Well, this may spill over, and maybe with these special units, it's not the right one here, but from the neighborhood perspective, these both related to community policing then, was like who was supposed to know, and if there wasn't one person to call, how would the patrol people know? And I've personally never known what that system was, except for somebody making some verbal comments at shift change, which there's just not enough time to touch on everything, not in District 1 anyway.
Sure.
And so I truthfully wasn't sure where it fell down. It was
Well, I
just
know
very
there have been
unfortunate
some, I know there have been some recent additions where code has provided addresses of
Right.
places that were placarded to the dispatch center, because that's not going to be the best system where it's just Officer A telling Officer B. We have to get that information to the dispatch center so they add it to the address is the best way, because as we can both tell you, you might work a shift and you might be assigned on the west side of town, but by the way the call loads go, you spend your entire time on, so you may not know. So it's all got to be tied through the dispatch center to that address for the information to be relayed from shift to shift and day to day.
Well,
So-
and maybe that's for another day, but that's where,
Yeah.
that's an example of places where my some of my neighborhoods have felt a great loss with losing the community policing as we had it before, because the communication wasn't there for an uninformed new officer of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that could happen on anything, that's significant. Thank you.
Okay. Where we at?
I think that is the last, like I said, I kind of randomly selected a few of those specialty units off that list just to kind of paint a picture of the training that they receive. If you have any questions about any of the units and their training, I can certainly try to answer those, or if you're wanting to move on to any of the discussion items, we can do that.
We can start on the discussion items, Karen and Mike, is that okay? Is that okay, Karen? Again, I will say that we're not gonna get through this. I'm not in a hurry. I mean, this is good stuff. This is good stuff, and so I don't wanna, rush it, but I don't wanna be here all day either, but I just wanna make sure we get what we need. So, let's go ahead and we'll start.
So I saw on the first discussion item, A was chokeholds. I think we've discussed that a little bit in one of the previous meetings, but I think it was in general terms through our use of force policy. So just on that topic, I just felt it was important to kind of talk specifically about that section within our policy.
Okay?
Because, you know, I know there's a lot of discussion across the nation about chokeholds, banning chokeholds, whether that's done through an ordinance, or whether that's kept in policy, or whether that's a combination of both. But currently, the Topeka Police Department Use of Force Policy 4.2, in the section 4.2.12, under prohibited use of force, states officers shall not use any type of neck restraint or chokehold unless deadly force would be authorized. So that is at the level that we place that type of restraint, if you will, is at the level of a deadly force. And just to clarify on that, 4.2.8 under deadly force, an officer is justified in using deadly force only when such an officer reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm to the officer or another person. So the national discussion on chokeholds, banning chokeholds, is definitely ongoing. But I felt it was important to point out that this has been within our policy for as long as I can remember, banning neck restraints or chokeholds unless it rises to a level of authorized deadly force.
Okay? Karen?
In the course of maybe as much national discussion and reading about this as local, there's apparently some sort of a maneuver where you put pressure on the sides of someone's neck that is technically different than a chokehold. Can you talk about that and talk about whether that's okay or whether that too is prohibited in what our language is?
So what you're referring to is prohibited within our policy, and what you're talking about is a lateral vascular neck restraint.
Of course, that.
LVNR.
Okay.
But yes, that file that under the category of neck restraint or chokehold, and that is prohibited within our policy and is not trained in our.
That was my next question then, because then it's like not okay unless deadly force is needed. We are not training, or we are training on those two maneuvers?
We are not training on those two maneuvers. And I mean, to give you an example.
Okay.
And bear with me because there's no great way to provide kind of a parallel example here. we don't train our officers to intervene or defend themselves with their ink pen. But if a situation arises where that's all they got and that's what's in their hand and things go bad in a hurry, then
They could use it.
that could be a justified use of force under the totality of the circumstances.
Okay.
So, a weapon of necessity, if you will, a technique of necessity, that would be where a chokehold, a untrained restraint may come into play. Hopefully that
That
makes
does.
sense.
So in your view then, as far as this being one of the issues that was raised locally, as well as, of course, on a national agenda, this issue is a non-issue into, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there anything to talk about?
I'm comfortable with our policy. I'm very comfortable with how our policy
I
is
think,
written.
I think it's important that we address it. I think this committee is the appropriate place to address that, but that is the factual information today, and it has been for a period of time.
Thank you.
That they are not being trained on this.
Right.
It's a violation. Both of them are violations unless there's deadly force would have been authorized, and we don't train on either one of them.
Correct.
Okay. Mike, anything?
Okay?
Okay. The next item for discussion that I saw on the list were the no-knock search warrants. And as you know, the ordinance was passed several months ago, banning those within the city limits of Topeka. And we've made, obviously, changes and rolled out that ordinance and to those officers who are tasked with serving search warrants to ensure compliance in that area. Interestingly, and I don't remember if we brought this up in one of our earlier meetings or not, you know, the no-knock search warrant was never a heavily utilized tactic here at the agency. Pulling just some numbers from January of 2017 through just before the passing of the ordinance. So we're talking a 3.5-year period. We served 9 no-knock search warrants out of 95 search warrants that were served.
9 out of 95?
Yes.
Okay.
So was never really a heavily relied upon tactic, and it didn't really change the way we do business a great deal. Anyway, once the ordinance was passed. So the officers are in compliance with the knocking on the actual physical structure, the 15-second delay. In fact, in the manner in which we do it, we're a little beyond the 15 seconds. On our search warrants, we have the ability to use a long-range amplification device that actually makes very loud, clear announcements in addition to the verbal announcements physically done by the officer knocking on the residence. So we've kind of even taken it a step further in that.
And I think that's important. That's another important point. I mean, we train, the team trains very hard in the execution of search warrants. We put a great deal of resources, equipment-wise. We're always looking at options to what we can use from a technology standpoint and best practice standpoint, and we learn lessons from across the country. And, you know, these search warrants are done with sometimes related to investigations of very violent crimes. With people that are potentially very violent. And we have handled this for a long time. The response team that we have at the police department is a very highly trained and dedicated group that spends a great deal of time and takes a lot of effort into what they do, and they do it very well.
Thank Karen?
Question, and I know all three of us were on the council during that time, but of those 9, that's 10% of your warrants. And the same folks that don't want somebody inappropriately captured also want safety for neighbors and children and environments in our city. So, would the lack of that ability to, with the new ordinance, have worked in the 9 cases that had no-knock warrants in the 3.5 years? Would we have been able to be as successful as
I am very
we were?
confident in our team's level of expertise, training, and equipment for them to react appropriately in those situations. Had those been the rules,
I remember somebody talking about it in an incident where, which I don't know if it was maybe longer ago than that, but somebody who was very dangerous and been very much wanted was captured. He was asleep with a pile of guns next to him. And I don't know if there was knocking. I don't think there was in that case. But people were real
I have
happy
no
that
idea
that
what
particular
case-
individual got taken in.
I have no idea what case it is that you're talking about, so
Okay.
I couldn't speak to it.
And I can just tell you, serving on the response team for 17 years, we were never fans of waking people up and startling people in their sleep.
Okay.
We try to plan, when we have the ability to plan the operation, we hope to do so when we know folks are kind of up and oriented, to kind of remove that startle effect.
Okay.
But kind of to go back, I think to your question, when things change, we adapt. We go back to the creative drawing board and we come up with the next safest, best way to do this. And if something gives us pause, there's a lot of checks and balances and levels of approval that all of these operations go through. Even at my level, I don't get to make that decision. The requests for that operation, the requests to utilize the team for the service of a search warrant goes all the way to the front office. Plans are in place, operational plans.
You want to touch a little bit on knock and announce versus, no, I didn't know if you got into that in the first one.
Well, so there's.
Because I think no knock traditionally, maybe
Sure.
even in the 9 that he's talking about, aren't nationally what
Yes.
are no knock.
It's important to
Okay.
differentiate a no-knock warrant, and I think when people hear that term, they envision this tactical team approaching residents and under the cover of darkness, the door is breached and they run through the house, room to room, as quickly as they can and completely out of control. I can't speak for how business is done across the nation, but the no-knock search warrants that I've been a part of over the years, I would categorize under what we would call a breach and hold, or a breach and call out, if you will. And if it kind of is what it sounds like, that breach may occur without an initial knock, but the entry isn't made upon the breach. Are we kind of tracking on what I'm talking about there? So the door is breached possibly without a knock or announcement, but announcements immediately start at that point prior to any entry, because then the goal is I've breached that door to kind of remove that safety blanket, and so I can see or own as much of that structure from the outside as possible.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is then to make those announcements immediately upon that door being breached, so everyone inside knows that it is the police department outside. And then we start giving announcements that express our desire for you to come to the door, make yourself known voluntarily. And then the last resort of the last movement is obviously having to physically clear that structure. So, for years, here in Topeka, a no-knock search warrant has been served a little bit differently than what you might envision. If you can kind of picture that breach and hold. So the breach, announcements are made, the entry isn't made yet, we're calling people to us, come to us, hands in the air, come to us. And that's how we've conducted no-knock search warrants for years.
So Sergeant, if you're after Jimmy, but Jimmy has a family, he's in there with his kids and his wife, so you come there, and are you hollering for him then?
Yeah.
Just him?
So,
Or, I mean, how do you deal with it when a family's involved? Or and you might not know that at that particular time, but.
right. We, obviously, best case scenario, when we make entry to physically clear that structure, we'd prefer that it be empty at that point. So those announcements are for any occupants to come to the door, make yourself known, come to the door. Police department, come to the door, make yourself known. And then those people will come to the door, they'll be removed, taken out of that equation. So when that search continues, because maybe everybody comes out but Jimmy. So if there's gonna be one person left inside, I would rather it be just Jimmy and not Jimmy and Jimmy's girlfriend.
I think there's a great deal of information that goes into the planning of those two, surveillance, intelligence, so we generally have an idea, and the captain can talk to you, but, I mean, sometimes we are very specific on the time that we go and execute it too. If we know there's kids involved, after school has already begun and they're out of the house, I mean, we can do the surveillance and see who's coming and going, and those kind of things are all part of the operational plan to try to minimize that.
There are, more often than not, we know the schedule of those involved. We kind of know when occupant A or occupant B might leave for work, or what school the kids go to and what time that school starts. And that's where other resources within the agency come in. We'll double check that it's not late start day for that particular school, if we plan.
And maybe you'll follow the car out and you'll just do a car stop down the way, and then you'll come back with the keys to an empty house and execute the search warrant. There's a number of options
Ways
we
that
go
you
through
handle.
besides just going through the door.
Right.
But I think the captain was making the point, it's a very controlled thing. It's not much what you see on TV and stuff in that regards to it, so.
But what you were describing is that you might well break the door down so that there is vision. Doesn't require you to do the notice before you would break the door down, but just before you would go in?
Correct. Prior to, the ordinance that was.
That was explaining the
Place.
9 that were done priorly.
Okay,
Right.
so what does the ordinance change now then?
So the ordinance removes that ability for the no-knock breach of that structure to occur.
The breach and hold in the doorway is no longer.
So the
Okay.
announcements have to occur prior to a forced entry. And so, as the ordinance states, a minimum of 15 seconds physically knocking on the structure, the doorway to the structure, in a manner in which, people could, inside the structure, could reasonably hear the announcements. So, in that example, the service of the search warrant, an amplification device could be used to make announcements along with that officer who is physically knocking and making announcements on the structure. That occurs for a minimum of 15 seconds. And then the supervisor or the team leader on that operation will then actually authorize the breach or the forced entry to that door. And that doesn't mean that once that door is breached, that as you see on the movies, that they all run in and go through room to room as fast as you can. We continue to make announcements and try to bring people to us. But the advantage at that point to having that door open is, you know, in most structures, you can at least have a visual advantage to a portion of that structure before you actually ever even enter the structure. And there's obvious advantages to that as well.
Thank you.
I'd
Thank
like
you for
to
the review.
stop right here if we could. It's 5. I'm going to put this on the top of our next agenda so we can finish out. Is that okay, Deputy Mayor, with you?
It is fine.
Okay, if we don't have any more discussion, we don't, but I'll do that just in case we can kind of get our minds together. City Manager, I see you sitting there. I don't know if you want to add anything. No? No? Okay. This has been very, very good discussion. We appreciate this. Sergeant, appreciate it. Chief, appreciate it.
And we'll promote you soon, Captain.
Ed, I see that you're joining us. Would you like anything to add today? You're muted. I guess not. Mary Feeney?
Nope, nothing from me.
Okay. We will, I will get with Liz and we'll pick us a new date, and this concludes our meeting for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank
Chief.
you.